My name is Emma, and I'm 28 years old. I'm married to a kind and supportive man named Tom, and we're expecting our first baby in a few months. Right now, we live in the heart of the Kansas countryside, where the fields stretch endlessly, and the sky is always a brilliant blue. It's peaceful here, but our lives have been anything but calm. My father passed away last month after a long battle with illness. I had been his main caretaker during his final year, trying to ease his pain and keep his spirits up. I regret that I never had the chance to share the news of my pregnancy with him. The hospital visits, phone calls, and endless worry took a toll on me, but I was determined to make his last days as comfortable as possible. Our relationship with my sister, Sophia, had become strained. She's in her late 20s and lives in New York City with her husband, the CEO of a marketing company. Sophia always found it too difficult and expensive to visit, despite how much I needed her support. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it grew wider with each passing day. Her absence was a constant reminder of her disinterest, and I found myself handling our father's illness alone, feeling the weight of his condition and the burden of his care. It was hard not to resent her for not being there, for offering nothing but empty promises and excuses. The day arrived when we had to gather to discuss our father's will, and the tension in the room was palpable. Our mother, elderly and frail, sat beside me, her face a mask of quiet sadness. James, the lawyer who had handled our father's affairs for years, was present to guide us through the process. Sophia, always impeccably dressed, sat across the table, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Thank you all for coming," James began, his voice steady but sympathetic. "We're here to go over Mr. Thompson's will." Sophia's gaze was fixed on James, her impatience evident. "Can we just get to the inheritance?" "I have a meeting later," she snapped. James nodded and began reading from the will. According to Mr. Thompson's instructions, the house and the land will be left to Mrs. Thompson. Our mother's face showed a flicker of relief. The old farmhouse, which had been our family home for decades, was finally secured for her. But then it hit while the house was owned. The land had been rented, not purchased. The realization struck Sophia like a splash of cold water. "What about the rest?" Sophia asked sharply, cutting James off. James remained composed and continued. "The savings and the storage shed will be divided between Emma and Sophia." Sophia's eyes narrowed, her frustration unmistakable. "I want the $300,000 in savings." "I'll take that," Sophia declared. I was taken aback. "But that's not fair. I should get a share of the savings too." Sophia's tone was icy. "It's what I deserve. You've had the house and the land, and I need that money to cover my expenses." Our mother nodded in agreement, her voice trembling. "Emma, I believe you might find something valuable in the shed. It's been there for years." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had spent so much time taking care of everything, and now Sophia was claiming the lion's share of our father's savings without a second thought. It felt like an insult to all my hard work and sacrifice. As the meeting concluded, Sophia left quickly, her designer heels clicking on the wooden floor as she walked away. I was left standing in the quiet room with my mother and James, frustration boiling beneath the surface. "Emma, I'm sorry," James said gently. "It's not an ideal situation, but it's how the will is structured." I nodded, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. "I'll deal with it. I just hope that shed holds something useful." I walked out of the room, my thoughts racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shed had always been a mystery, filled with old farming tools and forgotten items. My father had never talked much about it, and I had never thought to question its contents. The drive back to our countryside home felt long and lonely. Tom was waiting for me when I arrived, his expression full of concern. "How did it go?" Tom asked as I walked in. "It was tense," I replied. "Sophia took all the savings. I'm left with the shed." Tom frowned. "I'm sorry. It's not fair." "I know," I said, feeling a pang of frustration. "But I have to check out the shed. Maybe there's something of value there." That evening, I stood in front of the old shed. Its wooden door was weathered and creaky, just as I remembered. Dusty, neglected, and forgotten. With a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped inside. The shed was dimly lit, and the smell of old wood and rusted metal filled the air. Tools were scattered around, covered in a thick layer of dust. As I moved deeper into the shed, I noticed a small door at the back, partially hidden behind a pile of old machinery. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed aside the equipment to reveal the hidden door. It was locked, but a rusty key hung on a nearby hook. My heart raced as I unlocked the door and opened it. Inside was a cramped space, and in the corner sat a large safe. My pulse quickened. Could this be what I had been hoping for? The small room was dim, but the heavy old safe stood out, its surface scratched and worn. My hands trembled as I turned the handle. The safe creaked open, revealing neatly arranged boxes and a few velvet-lined cases. I opened the first box and my eyes widened. It was filled with expensive-looking watches, several of them glimmering under the weak light of the shed. I recognized some of them. They were part of my father's collection. My heart raced as I realized their potential value. These weren't just old trinkets. They could be worth a significant amount of money. I knew I had to handle this carefully. The inheritance dispute with Sophia was far from over, and the discovery of these watches could change everything. I took photos of each watch and carefully placed them back into the safe. I needed to consult professionals to understand their value and figure out the best way to move forward. When I returned to the house, Tom was waiting anxiously. He could tell by my expression that something significant had happened. "What did you find?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "I found a safe in the shed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's filled with watches. I think they might be worth a lot." Tom's eyes widened. "That's incredible. But what now?" "I'm going to consult a lawyer and an accountant," I replied. "We need to handle this properly. There's a lot at stake." Over the next few days, I met with James, the lawyer who had handled my father's will. I showed him the photos of the watches and explained the situation. James studied the photos carefully. "These are indeed valuable. Your father had quite an impressive collection. I'd recommend getting them appraised by a professional to determine their exact worth." I nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "What about the inheritance tax and dividing the watches?" James thought for a moment. "Once we have an appraisal, we can figure out the tax implications. It might be best to sell some of the watches to cover those expenses and then distribute the rest according to the will." Following his advice, I hired an appraiser to evaluate the watches. When the results came in, I was stunned. The collection was worth at least $600,000, far more than I had anticipated. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety as I realized the true extent of our inheritance. The next step was handling the taxes. I consulted an accountant to make sure everything was in order. The process was complicated and stressful, but I was determined to get it right. To cover the taxes, I decided to sell a portion of the watches and set aside some money for the relatives who had supported us during this difficult time. I kept one watch, a beautiful pocket watch that had belonged to my father, for sentimental reasons. News of the gift cards I had sent to relatives soon reached Sophia. I had hoped to keep things amicable, but her reaction was anything but friendly. She called me one evening, her voice icy and demanding. "Emma, I heard about the gift cards," she said sharply. "What's going on?" "I'm just trying to do the right thing," I replied. "I found some valuable watches in the shed, and I'm handling everything according to the will." Sophia's tone grew even sharper. "So, you're hiding a windfall and trying to make it look like charity?" "I'm not stupid, Emma. I'm not hiding anything," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm just handling this the best way I can. The watches are worth a lot, and I'm making sure everything is taken care of." Her anger was palpable. "You're just trying to undermine me." "I'm coming over to sort this out." I hung up the phone, my heart pounding. I knew Sophia's behavior was driven by her own greed and financial troubles. Her lavish lifestyle in New York City came with its own set of pressures, and I suspected she was desperate for money. The next day, I continued working on sorting out the inheritance. Tom and I decided to focus on our future and prepare for the arrival of our baby. Despite the ongoing tension with Sophia, we tried to stay positive. I felt a sense of accomplishment knowing that I was doing my best to handle things fairly and responsibly. I was managing everything responsibly, even if it meant facing Sophia's anger. Little did I know, her desperation was about to lead her down a dangerous path. The days following our last conversation were tense. Sophia's frustration was palpable. Despite my attempts to reassure her, her mood only darkened. Her phone calls became more frequent and accusatory, filled with demands for explanations and thinly veiled threats. One evening, just as Tom and I were finishing dinner, the phone rang. It was Sophia again. I answered with a sigh, trying to sound as calm as possible. "Emma, I'm coming over," she said without preamble. "I need to see this safe and find out what you're hiding." "Sophia, this isn't necessary," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything is being handled according to the will. We're just following the legal process." "I don't care," she snapped. "I'm coming over to see it for myself." The call ended abruptly, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Tom looked at me, his concern evident. "What's going on?" he asked. "Sophia's coming over," I said, feeling the weight of the impending confrontation. "She's convinced I'm hiding something from her," I said. Tom nodded, his face grim. "We need to be careful. Her desperation might lead her to do something rash." That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining what Sophia might do. Her life in New York had been luxurious, but it came with its own set of problems. The pressure to maintain her high status had left her in a precarious financial situation, and I feared she might be driven to take drastic measures. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast, I heard a commotion outside. Peering out the window, I saw Sophia's car parked in our driveway. My heart sank. She had arrived unannounced and was agitated. "Emma, open the door," Sophia shouted from outside, her voice a mix of frustration and desperation. I hesitated for a moment, but then went to the door and opened it. Sophia pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were filled with a mix of anger and fear. "Where's the safe?" she demanded. "I want to see it now." "Sophia, this is not how we should handle this," I said, trying to remain calm. "We need to resolve this without escalating things." She ignored me and headed towards the shed. I followed her, feeling a wave of dread wash over me. Tom stayed behind, trying to stay out of the confrontation. In the shed, Sophia's eyes darted around until she spotted the safe. She moved towards it with purpose, her hands shaking. "I knew you were hiding something," she said. "I want to see it now." "Sophia, stop," I said, reaching out to stop her. "This isn't going to help. You're just making things worse." But Sophia was beyond reason. She fumbled with the safe's handle, her frustration growing. In her panic, she knocked over a stack of old farming tools. The noise was loud and echoed through the shed. Suddenly, I heard a faint voice calling from the house. It was our mother, calling to see what was happening. I turned to look, but when I turned back, Sophia was frantically trying to open the safe. Just then, I heard a loud crash followed by a cry of pain. Sophia had toppled over the safe, and it had landed on her leg. She cried out in agony as she tried to move. I rushed to her side, but it was clear she was hurt badly. "Mom, call the police," I shouted, trying to stay calm. "Sophia's injured." Our mother, having heard the commotion, appeared in the doorway of the shed. Her face was pale as she hurried back to the house to call for help. I knelt beside Sophia, trying to comfort her despite my fear. The police arrived quickly, followed by an ambulance. The paramedics worked efficiently to get Sophia safely onto a stretcher. I watched helplessly as they loaded Sophia into the ambulance and drove away. Tom and I were left alone, the reality of the situation sinking in. Sophia's reckless actions had led to her injury and police involvement. We were both shaken, but we knew we had to deal with the aftermath. Later that evening, as we cleaned up the shed, our mother came to sit with us. Her face was lined with worry and fatigue. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said softly. "I didn't want things to end up like this." "It's not your fault, Mom," I said. "Sophia made her own choices. We just have to focus on moving forward and making sure everything is taken care of properly." Tom nodded in agreement. "We need to be prepared for what might come next. Sophia's actions might have serious consequences." As we sat together in the quiet of the evening, I reflected on the day's events. Sophia's desperation had led her to make a dangerous gamble, and it had cost her dearly. I hoped that, with time, she would come to understand the consequences of her actions and find a way to rebuild her life. But for now, Tom and I had to focus on our future and prepare for the arrival of our baby. The ordeal with Sophia had been a harsh reminder of how easily family bonds could be tested. As the days turned into weeks, the chaos of the past few months began to settle. Sophia's injury had been severe, and her stay in the hospital was extended due to complications. It was clear that her actions had not only hurt her physically, but had also deepened the rift between us. Tom and I settled into a routine of caring for our mother, preparing for the arrival of our baby, and managing the aftermath of the inheritance discovery. The shed was now neatly organized, and the safe's contents were safely stored in a secure location. We had taken care of the inheritance taxes and made sure everything was handled according to the law. One afternoon, as I was organizing baby clothes in the nursery, my phone rang. It was Sophia. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Emma," she said, her voice sounding weary. I wanted to talk. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Sophia, what's on your mind?" "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," she began. "I realize now that I let my greed and desperation get the better of me. I'm sorry for what I did." Her apology was unexpected. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, and it was clear she had been through a lot. "Sophia, I appreciate your apology. It's been a difficult time for all of us. What's important now is how we move forward." "I know," she said. "Tom and I have been talking, and he's decided to file for divorce. He can't handle the stress and the lies anymore. I'm left with the consequences of my actions, and it's more than I can bear alone." I felt a pang of sympathy. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't ignore the fact that Sophia was still my sister. "I'm sorry to hear that, Sophia. I hope you find a way to heal and rebuild your life." "Thank you," she replied. "I'm coming back to Kansas to see Mom and you. I want to make amends if you'll have me." When Sophia arrived a few days later, the atmosphere in the house was tense but hopeful. She had a visible limp and looked worn out, but there was a determination in her eyes. Our mother greeted her with a mixture of relief and caution. "I'm here to make things right," Sophia said as she entered the house. "I know I've caused a lot of pain, and I want to do whatever I can to make amends." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. "We all need to work through this, Sophia. We've had a lot of changes in our lives, and we must support each other." The days that followed were filled with difficult conversations and healing. Sophia spent time with our mother, helping around the house and sharing stories of her time in New York. It was clear that she was genuinely trying to make up for her mistakes, though the process was slow and fraught with lingering tension. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Sophia handed me a small package. "I wanted to give you something," she said. "It's a token of my apology and a symbol of my commitment to making things right." I opened the package to find a beautiful pocket watch, similar to the ones I had sold. It was intricately designed and had a note attached. The note read, "For Emma, with love and regret. May this remind you of the importance of family and the power of forgiveness." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at the watch. "Thank you, Sophia. This means a lot to me." Sophia smiled, a look of relief on her face. "I'm glad. I want us to heal and move forward. I know it will take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." As the weeks went by, things slowly began to return to a new normal. Sophia's presence brought a renewed sense of hope and reconciliation. Tom and I continued to prepare for our baby's arrival and found comfort in the support of our family. The final turning point came when Sophia and I sat together in the garden, watching the sunset over the fields. It was a moment of quiet reflection and mutual understanding. "I wish Dad could have seen us together like this," Sophia said softly. "I think he would be proud of how we're working through everything." "I think so too," I replied. "It's been a tough journey, but we're finding our way, and that's what matters." With the birth of our baby, life took on a new dimension. The challenges we faced brought us closer together, and the lessons learned from the inheritance dispute strengthened our bonds. As we welcomed our child into the world, We did so with a renewed sense of family and hope for the future. The story of our father's legacy had ended in unexpected ways, but it had also opened doors to healing and reconciliation. Despite the pain and struggle, we emerged stronger, more understanding, and ready to embrace the new beginnings that awaited us.